a loaf shattered without touch. Yet every crumb hides a secret. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Your comments make this even better. Where are you watching from today? I can't wait to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now let's begin the mystery. If there is anything that can make Wolfe glance at the door twice, it's not gunfire or a sob story. It's a loaf of bread that arrives without an appointment. At 11:40 that Tuesday morning, I was at my desk in the office with the ledger open and the dictation cylinder waiting for me to pretend I still use it. The orchids were doing their hothouse breathing upstairs, and Wolfe was doing his, parked in the red leather throne he favors for contemplating the defects of humanity. It was not a day that promised adventure. The only plan I had was not to have one. Then the doorbell rang with a decisiveness that suggested money or trouble, and you can't always tell which is which until you open the door. I did. On the threshold stood a woman holding a brown paper parcel like a crown on a velvet cushion. She was early 30s, black hair cut straight, eyes that looked at you as if she had decided to trust you and was waiting for confirmation. Behind her, a man stood half a step back and half a foot taller, with the kind of shoulders that had either lifted sacks of flour or people out of nightclubs, and I wasn't yet ready to guess which. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, as if the package had been promised a particular set of hands. "That's the name," I said. "If the parcel is a bomb, you're 20 minutes early, and I refuse to be assassinated before lunch." "It's bread," she said. "I need Mr. Wolfe." "Bread he doesn't need," I told her, "but he appreciates it in the proper channels." I held the door. "Come in." They came. In the office, Wolfe lifted an eyebrow, his version of a welcoming committee. He looked past the woman to the parcel as if that might save time. I introduced Miss Livia Cardo, she said, "and this is Matteo D'Angelo." Wolfe breathed. "Put it on the table, Miss Cardo, before your hands sweat into it." His voice had the effect of folding people. She came forward and set the parcel down. The room was now intimate with that trick the best bread has, a warm, faintly sweet smell that advertises civilization better than a flag. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I'm from Cardo and Crown Bakery on West Houston. I brought, this." She untied the string. The paper unfolded to reveal a long, deep brown loaf with a scar down the middle like an old saber mark. The crust was burnished, blistered, proud. Even I, who let Fritz do the miracles and limit myself to applause, could tell this was no supermarket baton. Wolfe didn't lean forward, which would have been indecorous, but his attention did. "You bake it?" he asked. "I developed it," she said. "We call it the Concord loaf. It's on our seal and the window and the website, and every corporate caterer who wants to look humane buys it by the dozen. It's our—" She stopped. "It's our identity." "And," Wolfe prompted. "And it breaks itself," she said, with the controlled fury of someone who has tried screaming and found it inefficient. "Every third or fourth loaf. After it cools, in places it should not break. It doesn't just crack. It splits along a line that isn't the score. Not the ear, not the seam. She swallowed and looked at the bread like it had insulted her in public. "It breaks." And it ruins. Matteo D'Angelo hadn't said a word, which was considerate of him. When he finally did, the voice matched the shoulders. "She's not being dramatic. 2 hotel accounts threatened to drop us this week. We weighed the flour, recalibrated the oven, tested the starter. We don't think it's an accident." "There," Wolfe said, pleased with him for saving time. "You think it is malice?" "Yes," Livia said. "Someone is making it happen." "Bread," Wolfe murmured. He closed his eyes in pained memory. "Fritz." It wasn't a shout. Wolfe never shouts for Fritz Brenner when there's a risk of communicating disrespect to the kitchen. It was a summoning, and on that topic the brownstone runs like a church. In a moment, Fritz appeared in the doorway, neat as a violin and twice as sensitive. His eyes found the loaf and did a small, private widening. "Bread," he said, in a tone that would have made a careless baker kneel. "A specimen," Wolfe said. "Miss Cardo contends that some of her loaves have lately exhibited a spontaneous fracture post-cooling." Examined Fritz came to the table like a surgeon to an odd tumor. He bent, he sniffed, he pressed the crust with a fingertip and listened. Then he glanced at me, because watching Fritz listen to bread will always seem like performance art, even after you know it works. He took up the knife and made a measured cut. The crumb was open and glossy, flecked with the kind of irregular holes that make people pay extra, because they like to think accidents are artisanal. He nodded to himself. Then he turned the loaf and pressed along the length, and where his thumb pressed a hairline opened, widened, and the majestic body of the Concord loaf surrendered along an invisible fault. It wasn't a crumble, it was an engineered collapse. Fritz set down the knife and looked at Wolfe. "This is wicked," he said. "Not clumsy?" Wicked Wolfe's lips came together, which is how he smiles when he thinks nobody deserves to notice. He regarded Livia. "Who are we?" "Me," she said. "I own 40%. My ex-partner, Dominic Rizzo, owns 40. Matteo has 20. "That suggests a story," I contributed. "And if you tell it, it will cost less than if Mr. Wolfe has to peel it off of you with questions." "We were 4, Livia said, "and we were brilliant. We started in the back of a cafe with a second-hand deck oven and a starter my grandmother smuggled from Naples by forgetting it in her luggage. Then the cafe owner died. His nephew wanted double the rent and an equity bite. So we moved, and that's when we got an investor, a man named Wayland Garrison, and we got visibility. Food writers, television. Concord loaf went viral, if bread can go viral. "Everything can go viral if it sins correctly," I said. She ignored me. The 4th partner, Sasha Levin, sold her shares 2 months ago. She said she was burnt out, and I believed her because baker's hours do that. Then 2 weeks later, the breaking started. It's not that bread doesn't crack. It's that this is precise, repeatable, and it waits until delivery. "Cooling and transport," Fritz murmured, already somewhere in the cathedral of gluten. "Who benefits?" Wolfe asked. "Please avoid civic platitudes and choose a human." Livia looked at Matteo. He tightened his jaw. "Rizzo," he said. "Dominic. He wants to pivot to a line of shelf-stable products, cracker thins, branded sauces. He's been in a silent war with Livia over it for a year. If the Concord loaf looks unreliable, he gets leverage with Garrison to starve the bread program and fund his pet line. Or, Livia said tightly, Garrison himself. He doesn't like unpredictability. He used to sell insurance. This kind of thing speaks to him in forked tongues. Or, I offered, the ghost of Grandma and her neglected starter, back for vengeance. Fritz shot me a reproachful glance. Wolfe rotated a finger at the loaf. "Miss Cardo, why me?" "Your problem is technical and internal. You could hire a consultant, audit procedures, install cameras." "We did," Matteo said. "The consultant told us our ovens are fine and our starter is robust, and he took his fee like a man who appreciates bread but not honesty. Cameras, well, we put them in." Someone rearranged the angle on the one over the production table. Twice Livia's eyes were on Wolfe, steady. "Mr. Wolfe, I know you don't leave your chair unless an earthquake begs you, and I respect that. But you are," she paused. "You don't mistake appetite for greed. This is not just about money. We built something that's ours, and somebody is taking it apart along a line we can't see." Wolfe looked at Fritz. Fritz looked at the loaf again as if it had snuck in an additional sin while his back was turned. I knew what was happening because I live here. The brownstone had been trespassed by an idea. If you want to see Wolfe move, put an offense to food on the carpet and let it scatter crumbs of intent. Puis, he said mildly, which is not a refusal. He opened his eyes fully. You brought only this loaf? We brought 2, Matteo said, producing from the paper bag a twin. We've had 3 failures this morning. I kept one to show our staff. I brought 2 to show you one twice. Excellent. Wolfe shifted his weight, which for him counts as a waltz. Mr. Goodwin, you will accompany Miss Cardo back to her bakery this afternoon. You will observe the line from starter to rack, and you will not be obtrusive. Talk to all, names and functions. I will speak to Mr. Rizzo and Mr. Garrison here tomorrow at 11. Mr. Panza, I haven't called Saul yet, I said. You will. Ask him to visit Cardo and Crown after hours and observe what the cameras do not. Fritz, you will test this bread now. Steam, crust, proof, and... His nostrils flared. Salt. Fritz bowed. Yes, sir. He gathered the loaves with the tenderness of newsprint around a scandal and vanished kitchenward. Livia had been holding herself like a bridge with a truck on it. Now she let out breath. So you'll take it? Wolfe looked at her as if she had asked whether water intends to be wet. I will not have my house used for forensic theatre only to be denied its denouement, he said. Yes. We're not rich, Matteo said. We can pay, but your investor can pay, I told him cheerfully. Mr. Wolfe is not a charity, and he is not a bakery, but he respects margins. We'll talk terms, and you can decide whether justice is worth a wholesale discount. Livia's mouth twitched. Justice, she said softly. Bread that breaks itself. What do you call that? Sabotage, I said. Sabotage has a crew. Who else is on your ship, Miss Cardo? Foreman? Drivers? Anyone with a key? She dug into her bag and produced a typed list that would have warmed a clerk's heart. I took it. Names, roles, shifts, the whole anatomy. She had come prepared. I like that in a client and in a witness. Wolfe lifted a palm. Enough for now. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you at 3. I expect Mr. Rizzo and Mr. Garrison tomorrow morning at 11. Insist we will, she said, and picked up the paper the loaves had vacated, folded it with the soldierly neatness that happens when you have been in a kitchen long enough to hate chaos. At the door she hesitated. Mr. Wolfe, she asked. Yes. Concord means agreement, she said. We made a bread to say that. If someone is using it to say the opposite, if that's their game, then what's the word for breaking concord? Wolfe didn't blink. Politics, he said. Good day, Miss Cardo. They went. The brownstone regained its lawful smell. Paper, polish, a little dust that no one admits to. I turned to Wolfe. You said salt like it was a suspect. Salt is never innocent, he said. Scruples, Mr. Goodwin. Like salt, preserve and ruin depending on dose and moment. Go call Saul, then eat lunch. We'll need our balance. From the kitchen came a sound not often heard in our house, a soft oath from Fritz in Swiss German which, if you've never heard it, is like listening to a lake lose its temper. I looked at Wolfe. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but to intensify. There are days when the city tries to teach you metaphysics by honking. Then there are days when a loaf of bread comes in and shows you its philosophy by falling apart where it shouldn't. I phoned Saul Panzer and set 3 o'clock in my book. If someone had decided to use bread to break a business, he had picked the wrong sanctuary to demonstrate in. Wolfe had taken it personally, which meant the culprit would be digested. I took Livia and her loaf list back to Houston Street that afternoon like Wolfe had instructed. She and Matteo drove ahead in a delivery van that smelled like a dozen varieties of dough in mid-transformation, and I followed in a cab because blending in isn't part of the Goodwin package. Cardo and Crown sat in a narrow brick building with a black and gold sign that tried hard to look older than the scaffolding it leaned against. Inside, the place was equal parts bakery, cafe, and stage. A glass case flaunted pastries, racks displayed the Concord loaf in photogenic rows, and an open kitchen let customers believe they were part of the miracle. The staff gave Livia nods that were half respect and half fear. She introduced me to the lot, using my name as though she expected me to take notes with my eyelashes. I did my share of smiling while my actual notebook handled the heavy lifting. There was Lou, the foreman, a wiry guy with the permanent scowl of someone who has argued with yeast for too long. Two apprentices named Marco and Elise looked barely old enough to rent ovens, but they moved with an efficiency that suggested skill or desperation. Delivery was handled by a man called Chet, whose grin said he liked lifting more than talking. And in the office upstairs, I was told, Dominic Rizzo could usually be found pretending spreadsheets were scripture. I started on the floor. Lou scowled at me and the pad equally. "You here to shut us down?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm here to make sure someone else doesn't shut you down first." That earned me the kind of grunt that can mean anything from approval to an ulcer. I asked about the Concord loaf and the mysterious splits. He didn't like the question. "Bread breaks," he said. "Yeah," I agreed. "But Wolfe says this bread breaks like it studied engineering first." That got a flicker. He shrugged. "You want every loaf perfect? Go work in a toy factory." I watched him prep dough. His hands were competent, but there was tension as though he wanted me to think he was too busy to scheme. Marco and Elise kept darting looks at me, like kids caught in a classroom with a substitute who might actually care about the assignment. Elise finally whispered when Lou's back was turned. "Not all of them break," she said. "I'm aware," I told her. "What makes the unlucky ones special?" Her eyes darted toward Marco. "Sometimes it's just one tray, always the middle rack. I thought the oven was off, but Lou says no." That was worth writing down. I made a note about tray positions, oven calibration, and who handled which shift. Matteo had vanished upstairs, so I drifted to the office. Dominic Rizzo was there, a tall man with sharp features and the kind of smile that had sold investors before it sold bread. His desk was littered with brochures for Cardo and Crown artisan thins, complete with glossy pictures of crackers that looked like they wanted to be more famous than bread. He didn't rise when I entered. "You must be Wolfe's man," he said. "I must," I said. "You're Rizzo. You want a number to write down. I'm the one keeping this place alive." Livia clings to nostalgia. Bread is romantic, but unreliable. People want products that last on shelves. "Convenient," I said, "since the Concord loaf seems to have developed a death wish." He gave me a thin smile. "Bread cracks. It's a fact. If Livia wants to believe in sabotage, she should check with her own conscience." That was a little too neat. I asked about Sasha Levin, the departed partner. Rizzo shrugged. She couldn't handle the hours. "She sold. Smart move, if you ask me. She's in Vermont now, raising goats or something." Not relevant, I let him talk, and he talked plenty. About market trends, expansion, and how investors like Garrison needed security. If he was guilty, he was also rehearsed. Either way, Wolfe would enjoy slicing him thinner than his cracker prototypes. Back downstairs, I caught Chet loading boxes into the van. He whistled off-key, cheerful. "Ever see the loaves break during delivery?" I asked. "Sure," he said, "but bread's fragile. You drive too fast, it talks back. I pad everything, though. Always have, 'Who rides with you?' Depends. Sometimes Matteo, sometimes nobody." It didn't reek of guilt, but it smelled faintly of opportunity. By the time I was done, I had a list of suspects with motives layered like a croissant. Rizzo with his cracker empire, Garrison the insurance man who hated unpredictability, Lou the foreman with a chip bigger than the ovens, and a couple of apprentices who might just be pawns or might be plotting in flour. At 3:40, I called Wolfe from the payphone across the street because using the bakery's line felt like feeding crumbs to a rat trap. I gave him the rundown: staff, dynamics, Rizzo's propaganda, Elise's whisper about the middle rack. Wolfe listened with the patience of a man evaluating vintages, then cut in. Saul will observe tonight. Your notes will suffice for now. Tomorrow at 11, insist that Rizzo and Garrison be punctual. We shall see what yeast they conceal. That was Wolfe for don't improvise. Let me orchestrate. I hung up, stuffed my notebook back in my pocket, and looked across the street at the bakery windows, where the Concord loaf sat glowing under the lights. A symbol of harmony, Livia had called it. But harmony is just another word for a balance someone is waiting to tilt. I had the feeling the bread wasn't the only thing ready to split. The next morning, the brownstone smelled of Fritz's eggs with herbs and butter so smugly balanced they could have testified in court. Wolfe, of course, had already retreated from the table to the office, which meant I was left to finish my plate while he positioned himself for the day's theater. By 10:45, I was in the office too, checking that the chairs were aligned in that semicircle Wolfe liked, something between a jury box and a confessional. If you've never seen Wolfe orchestrate a gathering, trust me, the furniture does half the intimidation before he even speaks. At precisely 11, the doorbell announced punctuality in the form of Dominic Rizzo. He entered in a gray suit sharp enough to slice parmesan, carrying a briefcase that had clearly rehearsed being opened in boardrooms. He sat without asking, which told me he thought he was the client, not the suspect. 10 seconds later, Wayland Garrison arrived, looking like a man who had been manufactured from pressed khaki and confidence. He was older, pale, and had the square jaw of someone who believed insurance actuarial tables were as thrilling as Shakespeare. Both men glanced at each other with that polite disdain business partners save for private meetings. Wolfe didn't bother with preamble. "Gentlemen," he said, "the Concord loaf is being betrayed. Miss Cardo believes this is the work of deliberate hands." "You will clarify," Rizzo leaned back. "It's bread, Mr. Wolfe." "Bread cracks. I told Archie yesterday." "You told Mr. Goodwin many things," Wolfe interrupted. "Your effusions are noted." "I am interested in facts." Garrison cleared his throat, a small insurance cough. "The facts are that a product is unreliable. Unreliable products erode confidence. Confidence is the marrow of business. If it is not corrected—" "If," Wolfe said, savoring the word as if it were a sour grape. "Bread does not invent betrayal. Humans do. Which of you profits from the failure of this bread?" That landed like a stone in a fountain. Rizzo's smile froze. Garrison spread his hands. "No one profits. We all lose." "Not true," I said. "Rizzo's got a side hustle ready to roll. Cardo and Crown Thins. Break the loaf, push the cracker," Rizzo snapped. "That's business strategy." "It doesn't make me a saboteur." Wolfe lifted one heavy hand. "Mr. Rizzo, if I require a definition of sabotage, I will request a dictionary, not you. Mr. Garrison, you once sold insurance. Tell me, does it comfort you when variables vanish, or when they remain measurable?" Garrison frowned. "Predictability is the foundation of order." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And what is more unpredictable than a loaf of bread, collapsing at whim? Would it not serve your creed to destroy the variable entirely, to pressure Miss Cardo and Mr. D'Angelo into abandoning the loaf, and thereby protect your investment with a product less mercurial?" Garrison shifted in his chair, just enough to betray discomfort. "That is not my intention." I was about to press when Fritz appeared silently, bearing a small tray with the two halves of yesterday's dissected loaf. He set it on Wolfe's desk like evidence. Wolfe gestured. "Mr. Rizzo, you will observe. The split is precise, not careless, not natural, wicked, as Mr. Brenner termed it." Rizzo stood, bent, glanced at the seam and shrugged. Looks like bread to me. Of course, Wolfe said dryly. You're in crackers, not perception. That got a flush from Rizzo, which I marked in my book. Wolfe closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Enough. Mr. Goodwin, you will arrange interviews today with the apprentices, Marco and Elise. Their perspectives will be unpolished but possibly honest, and you will remind Mr. Panzer to report his observations from last night. That was the cue to fetch Saul. I left the office, let Rizzo and Garrison stew in Wolfe's silence, and dialed Saul from the hall. He answered in his usual understated monotone. Bakery's clean. No intruders. But I saw Lou move trays after hours. He checked the middle rack, pulled 2 loaves, put them back, then left, like he was measuring something only he understood that was worth a note. I returned and relayed it. Wolfe opened his eyes. Interesting. Lou scorns surveillance, yet he watches when he thinks no one sees. That stinks of conscience or complicity. Rizzo barked a laugh. Lou? He's a crank, not a saboteur. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. We shall see. Mr. Goodwin, after you visit the apprentices, speak again with Lou. Probe, I nodded. Garrison rose abruptly. Mr. Wolfe, I invested in stability. If you are suggesting I'm undermining it. I'm not suggesting, Wolfe said smoothly. I'm observing possibilities. Your indignation is noted. You may go. They went, one after the other, like badly synchronized dancers. When the door closed, I looked at Wolfe. You're stirring them. I am kneading them, he corrected. Bread requires it, and so does truth. Fritz returned to gather the tray. Wolfe stopped him. Fritz, continue with your tests. Salt, steam, timing. If there is a technical fissure, I will not have overlooked it. Yes, sir, Fritz said gravely, and disappeared again. I leaned on the desk. So, where are we, boss? Rizzo with ambition, Garrison with control issues, Lou with midnight hobbies, or one of the kids hoping to inherit the crown. All of them, Wolfe said, but only one is guilty. The loaf is concord, Mr. Goodwin. Concord is agreement. What breaks agreement? Not accident, not nature. Will. Tomorrow evening all shall assemble here. Until then, sift, I grinned. Sifting flour's their job. Mine's the people. And with that, I picked up my notebook, checked my watch, and headed out. The bakery was waiting, and so were 2 nervous apprentices with stories they hadn't rehearsed yet. Wolfe had set the pieces. My turn was to move them. I reached Cardo and Crown again just after 2, notebook in pocket and Wolfe's instructions echoing in my head. The bakery smelled like it always did. Warm yeast, coffee, and the faint tang of flour hanging in the air like an invisible curtain. Marco and Elise were by the prep table, shaping dough with the seriousness of surgeons, while Lou paced the far side, muttering at the ovens. I didn't start with Lou. Saul's observation of his late-night tray shuffle was something I wanted to hold in reserve. First, the apprentices. They looked young enough to believe honesty might protect them, which is rare in New York and priceless in an investigation. I leaned against the counter. Marco, Elise, you've both been here long enough to know the bread better than your own handwriting. Talk to me. Elise's hands kept moving, tucking dough, but her eyes flicked toward me. Marco slowed, then stopped entirely, staring at the floor. Elise spoke first. It's not always random. The breaks. I told you yesterday. The middle rack. It happens more on Lou's shift. Marco gave her a sharp look. Don't start. I'm not starting, she said. I'm telling him what's true. That was promising. I prodded gently. So Lou's shift sees more fractures. What about yours? Hardly ever, Elise said. When it does, Lou says it's because we're sloppy. But I know it isn't, Marco finally muttered. Lou's not stupid. If something's wrong, he sees it, or makes it, Elise snapped back. I jotted it down. Internal friction between apprentices and foremen is common, but this felt sharper, with edges honed by repetition. I asked, "You two ever see Rizzo or Garrison down here, hands on dough?" Elise laughed without humor. "Rizzo? He doesn't even eat bread anymore. Low-carb diet. He just talks about crackers, and Garrison only comes to the cafe when there's a camera around. Neither of them touches the ovens that fit the picture." I pushed further. "What about Sasha Levin, the partner who left?" Marco hesitated. "She taught us a lot. She hated Rizzo. Said he didn't care about bread, only image, but she was tired. Said the Concord loaf was cursed because it meant too much to too many people. Then she sold and left." Elise's voice was lower now. She cried the day she left. She touched the ovens like she was saying goodbye to something alive. That detail, while poetic, was Wolfe's kind of nourishment. I tucked it away. I was about to angle back toward Lou when the man himself barked across the room. "Goodwin, you done filling their heads with nonsense?" I turned. "Just collecting the daily specials." "Want to contribute one?" Lou stalked closer, flour streaking his forearms. His face was set in lines that looked carved, not chosen. "You don't understand bread. You don't understand this place. You think some conspiracy's hiding in the racks. It's heat, humidity, chance." That's all I let him huff, then leaned in slightly. "Saul Panzer saw you last night, after hours, pulling loaves from the middle rack. Want to explain why you spend overtime communing with bread?" That stopped him cold. His eyes narrowed. "You had someone spying." "We had someone watching," I corrected. "Differences in intent." For a moment I thought he'd blow. Then he deflated, wiping his hands on his apron. "I was checking patterns. I didn't want to admit it in front of them. If something's wrong, I'm supposed to know. I've worked ovens 20 years. If the bread's breaking and I can't explain it, what good am I?" That was raw honesty, and it rang true. I pressed, "So what did you find?" "Nothing I can prove," Lou muttered. "It's not the oven. Not the starter. The splits. Too neat, too placed. Like a knife, but from inside I wrote it down, word for word. Wolfe would savor that." Lou caught me scribbling and scowled again, but this time at himself more than me. By 4 I had enough to retreat. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the whole recital. Apprentices pointing fingers at Lou. Lou confessing to secret midnight checks, Sasha's teary farewell, and the observation that the breaks looked deliberate, not accidental. Wolfe sat in silence, eyes closed, lips pressed as if tasting each morsel. When I finished, he grunted. "Lou is not guilty. He lacks guile. His secrecy was pride, not malice. The apprentices, possibly tools, not actors. Rizzo and Garrison remain distasteful." I added, "Elise swears the breaks hit the middle rack more often." "Ah." Wolfe's lids lifted. "Position, not ingredient." Intriguing. He rang for Fritz. Fritz arrived, notebook in hand. Wolfe relayed Elise's comment and Lou's description. Fritz frowned deeply. "It is possible. If someone altered proofing baskets or cooling trays, one rack could become an accomplice." "I will test," he swept out, leaving the air heavy with yeast and implication. Wolfe turned back to me. "Tomorrow evening the office will host all principals, Cardo, D'Angelo, Rizzo, Garrison, Lou, and the apprentices. Before then, Mr. Goodwin, inquire after Sasha Levin." She abandoned her portion too conveniently. "I wish to know what she gained," I said. "Vermont's a long ride for goats. Maybe she'll bleat." Wolfe closed his eyes again. "Arrange it. And have Mr. Panzer shadow Rizzo. Men who laugh at evidence often do so because they know the punchline." That was that. Wolfe had shifted the gears, and the brown stone once again hummed with the rhythm of his control. Outside, the city churned with its own hungers, but inside, the case was rising like dough, slow and steady, waiting for heat. I phoned Saul, set him on Rizzo, then began digging for Sasha Levin's Vermont coordinates. If harmony had broken in the Concord loaf, it might be her hands that had loosened the first seam. By the time I tracked down Sasha Levin's number, the daylight had drained out of Manhattan, and the brownstone was cocooned in its usual evening calm. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, coaxing them into gratitude, and I had the office to myself, phone in hand, notebook ready. Vermont answered on the third ring, a woman's voice edged with the exhaustion of someone who had decided rural life was a cure, but hadn't found it yet. "This is Sasha." I introduced myself and got the sigh I was expecting, the sound of someone who thought she had escaped a place only to have it knock on her door again. "Cardo and Crown," she said flatly. I knew it would follow me. "What's happened?" I explained the problem in brief. The Concord loaf splitting in ways bread wasn't designed to split, and the suspicion that it wasn't the work of yeast or chance. There was a silence on the line that stretched just long enough to tell me she knew more than she wanted to. "You think someone's doing it on purpose?" she said finally. "I don't think," I told her. "I observe. And Wolfe does the thinking. Right now, he's inclined towards sabotage." She let out a low laugh. "Of course he is. It would be sabotage. Bread is honest. People aren't." That was practically Wolfe's creed. I asked, who would want to break it? Rizzo with his crackers? Garrison with his numbers? Lou trying to prove he's indispensable? "You were there. You tell me." Her tone sharpened. "Rizzo wants control. He never loved the loaf. He loved what it bought. Garrison wanted guarantees, not bread. But Lou? He was loyal to the dough, more than to any of us. He used to say the Concord loaf was our flag. If it fell, the ship sank." "No, not Lou," I pressed. "Then why sell your share and walk away?" She hesitated, and I heard Vermont whined in the background like she'd stepped outside. "Because I saw it coming." Not the sabotage, the collapse. We were no longer four people with one vision. We were four corners pulling in opposite directions. I thought if I left, maybe they'd remember the bread mattered more than their egos. "That worked out," I said. Her voice softened. "Maybe not." But I kept my grandmother's journals. The starter recipe, the methods. They can sabotage the bakery, but they can't erase what it was. I asked her if she had any recent contact with Rizzo or Garrison. She admitted Rizzo had called her twice after she left. Once to ask if she'd reconsider selling back, once to gloat about his new product line. Garrison hadn't spoken to her at all. I thanked her, got her promise. She'd be reachable if Wolfe required it, and hung up. I was writing it all down when Wolfe entered, smelling faintly of orchid fertilizer and disapproval. He listened as I read out the highlights, eyes closed, hands resting like immovable anchors on the chair's arms. When I finished, he nodded. "She confirms. Lou is excluded. The apprentices are minor. Mr. Rizzo and Mr. Garrison remain. Phooey. One is a striver, the other a coward. Both capable, souls tailing Rizzo," I reminded him. "We'll know if he sneaks a midnight date with the ovens." "Good," Wolfe said. "Tomorrow evening, the gathering. Until then, maintain pressure. Visit Garrison in his lair. He will attempt to conceal fear with reason. Disturb him." That was an assignment with teeth, and I was still considering how to phrase my questions when the phone rang. I grabbed it. It was Saul, his tone as calm as if he were reading the weather report. "Rizzo met a man tonight. Quiet bar on 9th. Middle-aged, broad shoulders. They spoke for 20 minutes. No handshake, no drink. Rizzo gave him a small envelope. Man left first. Rizzo lingered, then went home." "Description?" I asked. Chet, the delivery man. I'd stake it I relayed this to Wolfe, who opened his eyes fully. Chet, the man who carries bread. Of course. Transportation is the final hand to touch the loaf before delivery. An envelope suggests instruction or reward. Or both. I leaned back, whistling softly. So the cheerful lifter has a side job. That puts him in play. It does, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow morning you will interview Chet with diligence. Make him squirm, but not retreat. I wish him pliable for the gathering. The stage was tightening, piece by piece. I could feel it in the air. Wolfe had shifted from idle observation to quiet certainty. Someone in cardo and crown was cutting more than bread, and by tomorrow night, Wolfe intended to slice the culprit down to size. Fritz appeared at the door just then, holding a tray. On it sat 2 test loaves, their crusts gleaming, their seams intact. I adjusted salt ratios and steam, he reported. Neither broke. But the fault does not come from seasoning. It comes from hands. The bread is being wounded. Wolfe nodded once, as though the universe had confirmed his suspicion. Then tomorrow, the wounders will sit in this room, and we will see who bleeds. I put my notebook away, already picturing Chet's grin stiffen when I asked about envelopes and bar meetings. The case was rising, steady and hot, and Wolfe was waiting to set it in the oven. The next morning I found Chet where you'd expect him, leaning against the side of the delivery van like it was a bar stool that owed him a drink. The street was wet from an overnight drizzle, and the smell of bread drifted faintly out of the bakery door behind him. He spotted me and grinned wide like we were old pals meeting by accident. That grin didn't fool me now. I had Saul's report in my pocket and Wolfe's instructions in my ear. "Morning, Archie," he said, tossing me a casual salute with the hand not holding his coffee. "Come to watch me load the day's magic?" "Something like that," I said, though I'm less interested in the loaves going out than in the little envelopes going in. The grin froze. Not much, but enough. He tried to cover it by taking a long sip. "Envelopes?" "Yeah," I said evenly. "Saul Panza doesn't hallucinate, and he doesn't mistake shoulders. He saw you and Rizzo meet last night. Envelope changed hands. You want to explain, or should I let Wolfe do it in front of an audience?" Chet's coffee hand trembled just slightly before he steadied it. He glanced toward the bakery door, then back to me. "Look, it wasn't what you think." "I think it was either money or instructions," I told him. "You pick which makes you look less guilty." He blew out a breath. "Neither." It was lists, delivery addresses. Rizzo wanted me to bring them straight to him instead of through the office. Said he was tracking which clients were complaining most about the splits. He wanted to get ahead of it. Maybe spin it into leverage with Garrison. "Why the secrecy?" I asked. "You could hand that info to anyone over the counter." Because Rizzo said Livia would blow up if she knew he was monitoring accounts behind her back. Said it was just business positioning. That sounded slick, and Chet knew it. His grin didn't come back, but he tried to salvage something in his tone. "Look, I'm not messing with the bread. I drive, I unload, I keep it all safe. You think I'd risk my job to play games with crusts?" I studied him. He was nervous, but not panicked. That can mean either honesty or long practice. I decided to lean. "You'll be at Wolfe's tonight." "Everyone will. If you're clean, you'll want to sit straight and let the others sweat. If you're dirty, you'd better bring an excuse Wolfe can't chew through. Good luck finding one." He swallowed, nodded, and muttered something about deliveries before ducking inside. I left him there, knowing Wolfe would hear every word in my report, and file it in whatever cabinet of suspicion he was polishing. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe already in the office, leaning back in his chair with the patience of a man who had no intention of moving an inch until the truth walked in. Fritz had brought him a tray with cheese and a bottle of beer, untouched. Wolfe's eyes opened as I delivered Chet's explanation. He listened, hands folded, expression flat. When I finished, he said, "Pfui." Mr. Rizzo requests delivery records like a thief demands receipts. If he were truly analyzing complaints, he would do so openly. He wished to know which accounts had received injured loaves and which had not. That is a map of sabotage, which makes Chet a mule, I said. Maybe not the knife, but the messenger. Possibly, Wolfe admitted, but his hands touched the loaves. He could wound them with ease. Yet I doubt his imagination. He has strength, not subtlety. We shall test him tonight. Wolfe's certainty was mounting. I'd seen it before, the case reaching a point where suspects ceased being a list and began being pieces on his board. Once Wolfe moved to arrange them, the game was near its end. The rest of the day was logistics. I made calls, ensuring all parties would show at the appointed hour. Livia's voice was tight with nerves, but resolute. Matteo sounded ready for a fight. Rizzo confirmed smoothly, like he was attending a seminar where he expected to dominate the conversation. Garrison's reply was short and stiff, as though the idea of spending an evening in Wolfe's office was a form of indigestion. Lou grunted assent. Marco and Elise, when I reached them, sounded wary but willing. Even Chet said he'd come, though his voice had lost its easy humor. By 6, the brownstone was staged. Chairs set, the globe polished, the desk cleared except for Wolfe's glass of beer. Fritz had prepared hors d'oeuvres, though they would only serve as backdrop. The air had a gravity it gets on these nights, when Wolfe intends to draw every string taut until one breaks. As the clock ticked toward 7, Wolfe sat unmoving, hands resting like monuments on the chair arms, eyes closed. I knew the look. He wasn't asleep. He was arranging words, rehearsing pressure points. He'd enter that gathering with every phrase sharpened, every silence weighted. I stood by the desk, notebook ready, and said, "They'll all be here soon." "Yes," Wolfe murmured, without opening his eyes. "And tonight, Mr. Goodwin, we will see who breaks concord as surely as they break bread." The bell rang, and the brownstone ceased being a sanctuary. It became an arena. The brownstone filled the way it always does on nights when Wolfe calls for a gathering, a trickle of arrivals that turns into a crowd pressed against the atmosphere of his office. By 7:20, the semicircle of chairs was occupied. Livia and Matteo sat together, tense as steel wires. Rizzo lounged as though he'd been asked to endorse the place, one leg crossed, a faint smirk daring anyone to question him. Garrison looked like he'd been dragged in by actuarial charts, spine stiff, eyes darting like he expected a fire drill. Lou hunched forward, arms crossed, jaw tight. The apprentices, Marco and Elise, clung to the edges of their seats, whispering once or twice before falling into silence. Chet arrived last, smile pasted on but brittle, and the chair creaked when he dropped into it. Wolfe didn't speak at first. He sat, eyes closed, chin sunk, letting the silence expand until the air grew heavy. He does that not because he's theatrical, though he is, but because silence is a tool sharper than words. When he finally opened his eyes, the room was already leaning toward him. "You know why you are here," he said, his voice as even as butter on toast. "The Concord loaf, symbol of your enterprise, is being broken deliberately. Someone here is responsible, directly or by proxy. I have no appetite for melodrama, so let us dispose of it quickly." He gestured with one hand. "Mr. Goodwin." That was my cue. I stepped forward, notebook in hand, and gave the highlights of the case so far, the pattern of splits on the middle rack, Lou's secret midnight checks, the apprentice's suspicions, Sasha Levin's words from Vermont, Fritz's tests that eliminated salt and steam, and Saul's report of Rizzo handing Chet an envelope in a quiet bar. Each point landed like a nail being tapped, steady and unavoidable. By the time I was done, Rizzo's smirk had thinned, Chet's grin was gone entirely, and Elise was staring at the floor. Wolfe let the summary hang, then leaned slightly forward. Mr. Rizzo, explained. Rizzo's smile returned, brittle but present. As I told Archie, I was gathering delivery records. We're losing accounts. I wanted to know which ones. It's business, not sabotage. You chose secrecy, Wolfe said. Why? Rizzo shrugged. Because Livia would have taken it as betrayal. She clings to the loaf like it's religion. I wanted information, not a fight. Fey, Wolfe muttered. You betray by instinct. You conceal because you are concealed. Mr. Chet straightened, cleared his throat. Like I told Goodwin, I just passed along the lists. I don't touch the bread except to load it. I wouldn't risk my job messing with it. You are lying, Wolfe said, his tone flat. You touch every loaf. You have the last opportunity before delivery. The bread is intact, leaving the ovens. Fritz has confirmed it. The fault appears after. On your watch, Chet's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward Rizzo as if for support, but Rizzo kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. Wolfe let the silence gnaw at him before turning. Miss Elise. She jumped slightly. Wolfe's gaze pinned her like an insect. You whispered to Mr. Goodwin that the middle rack produced more failures. Why whisper? Her voice was barely audible. Because Lou doesn't listen. He thinks we're careless. But I knew it wasn't us. Lou growled. You think I don't care? I've spent more years on ovens than you've been alive. Enough, Wolfe said, and the room froze. Lou, you are excused. Your guilt is only in pride. You concealed your checks because you feared weakness. That is not malice. Sit silent. Lou subsided, scowling, but something like relief flickered across his face. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Garrison. And you, sir. You dislike uncertainty. You would eliminate it, even by sabotage, Garrison bristled. Nonsense. I invested in stability. Destroying the product destroys my capital, unless you meant to replace it with Rizzo's shelf-stable crackers, Wolfe said softly. But you lack the audacity. You are a coward, not a saboteur. That left the room pivoting back toward Rizzo and Chet. Wolfe folded his hands. The Concord loaf is a union of elements: flour, water, salt, time. Its fracture is not chance, it is inserted. After baking, during cooling or transport, a deliberate stress is made. Not a cut visible, but a weakening, time to split once cooled. A man with hands on the loaves could do it swiftly, consistently. Mr. Chet, that man is you. Chet's face flushed, and he half rose. That's crazy. Sit, Wolfe said. And somehow Chet did, like a puppet string had been yanked. You did not act alone, Wolfe continued. You're too simple. You were directed. Paid. The envelope was not your first. You did not choose the middle rack. You were told. Mr. Rizzo... Rizzo exploded, rising to his feet. That's outrageous. You can't. I can, Wolfe said calmly, because it is true. You wanted the Concord loaf discredited. You instructed Chet to stress certain loaves, to crack their pride invisibly. You then monitored which clients complained, intending to use the pattern as leverage to kill the loaf and push your line of crackers. Elegant, you thought. Plausible deniability, but inelegant men are always caught by crumbs. The room was electric. Livia stared at Rizzo as though she'd been struck. Matteo clenched his fists. Elise's mouth hung open. Lou looked ready to spit nails. Chet sat frozen, sweat slicking his temples. Rizzo tried to rally. You have no proof. Just guesses. Proof enough, Wolfe said. Mr. Panzer's observations, Mr. Goodwin's interviews, Mr. Brenner's tests, and your own arrogance. You believed bread was beneath you, that no one would notice its wounds. But bread is honest. It breaks where it is forced. Silence fell again, thick and final. Rizzo's shoulders sagged as though he'd been cut open. He sat heavily, no longer smiling. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. Miss Cardo, your Concord loaf is vindicated. What you do with your partners is your affair, but do not be deceived again. Agreement is fragile. Guard it. Dinner would come later, but for now, the office smelled of tension instead of food. Wolfe had broken the case without standing, and the brownstone held its breath around the fragments of a scheme that had thought itself invisible. The silence that followed Wolfe's final words stretched taut and dangerous, like a wire across the room. Livia was the first to move. She stood slowly, her eyes fixed on Rizzo, and in that look was all the history of their partnership: ambition, betrayal, and now disgust. Matteo rose beside her, his shoulders squared, ready to close the book with his fists if words wouldn't do. "You used us," Livia said quietly. "You used me. You used the bread." Rizzo tried to recover, his palms open in a gesture that might have worked on investors but had no currency here. "Livia, think. You know what the Concord loaf costs us. The time, the labor, the risk. I was protecting the business. Diversifying. Matteo spat. "You were strangling the heart of it so you could hawk crackers like every other supermarket parasite." Chet shifted uncomfortably, his gaze on the floor. The sweat that had pooled on his brow during Wolfe's revelation still gleamed. He muttered, "I didn't know it would go this far. I needed the money." "Needed?" Lou barked, his voice like gravel. "You get paid to drive, to handle bread with respect. You don't injure it for pocket change." Elise's whisper cut through the tension. "You broke it on purpose." Her words weren't loud, but the accusation carried. Marco reached for her arm as if to hold her back, but she shook him off. Rizzo, cornered, reached for arrogance as his shield. "You've all benefited from my vision. Without me, the bakery would still be in a cafe kitchen with a second-hand oven. I made it visible. I made it a brand. Concord would have crumbled under sentiment. I gave it direction." Wolfe, who had been listening with eyes closed, finally spoke, his voice low but resonant. "You mistake notoriety for substance, Mr. Rizzo. Bread does not live by your branding. It lives because hands honor its making. You sought to turn harmony into leverage. And for what? Crackers. Your offense is not merely sabotage. It is hubris." That word landed heavier than any insult. Rizzo sank back, color draining from his face, knowing Wolfe had skewered the heart of his motive. Garrison cleared his throat, eager to salvage his distance. "If this is true, then my investment has been betrayed as well. I trusted in unity. "You trusted in numbers," Wolfe interrupted. "You saw percentages, not people. Do not dress it otherwise." I stepped forward, ready to corral the mess before it broke into shouting. "Here's how it is." Wolfe has laid it out. Chet acted under Rizzo's instruction. The Concord loaf wasn't failing, it was being wounded. Now the choice is yours. Livia, Matteo. You can press charges, you can dissolve the partnership, or you can keep feeding poison to your own table. But the truth is no longer hidden. Livia's shoulders straightened. She turned to Chet. "You're done here. You'll get what you earned, but not from us again." Chet nodded, too ashamed to argue. Then she faced Rizzo. "Dominic, you're finished. I'll take this to the board, to Garrison, to anyone who needs to hear it. Concord will survive without you." Rizzo opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands closed into fists, then loosened. The fight had gone out of him, drained by Wolfe's calm dissection and the company's rejection. Wolfe raised one hand. "Enough. The brownstone is not a court. Justice will proceed elsewhere. Here, the matter is concluded." The gathering dissolved slowly, like dough slackening after the knead. Garrison left first, stiff and silent. Lou muttered curses under his breath, but offered Livia a nod of loyalty before stomping out. Elise clung to Marco, her expression still pale with betrayal. Chet slunk away, head low, a man reduced to a shadow. Livia lingered, her eyes meeting Wolfe's. "Thank you," she said simply. "You've given us back more than bread." Wolfe inclined his head, not as acknowledgement, but as dismissal. Matteo guided her out, steady and protective. Rizzo trailed last, and when the door closed behind him, the office was suddenly empty except for Wolfe, Fritz, and me. I let out a long breath. Well, that's that. Bread saved, saboteur exposed, harmony restored. Or at least patched, not restored, Wolfe said, opening his eyes. Concord is not easily mended. They will fracture again, perhaps in other ways, but the loaf at least is safe. He reached for his beer and took a long swallow, the first sign he considered the matter finished. Fritz stepped forward, setting down a fresh plate of cheese and bread, intact, unsplit, shining under the office lamp. "For you, Herr Wolfe," he said. Wolfe took a slice, examined it, and nodded. "As it should be." I scribbled the last of my notes, then leaned back. You know, for a case about bread, it had everything: betrayal, greed, pride, desperation, almost Shakespearean. Except with yeast, Wolfe closed his eyes again. Shakespeare knew nothing of yeast. That is why his tragedies lack savor. I grinned, snapped my notebook shut, and let the silence settle. Outside, the city roared with its usual hungers, but inside the brownstone, justice had been served, on a loaf that no longer broke itself. The house had gone quiet after the gathering, but quiet in the brownstone never lasts. Fritz cleared the remains of the evening, chairs back in line, glasses washed, crumbs swept like evidence erased. Wolfe stayed in his chair, eyes closed, beer finished, as immovable as a monument. I was halfway through the day's notes when the phone rang, sharp in the silence. I picked it up, expecting a follow-up from Livia or Matteo, but the voice wasn't theirs. "This is Sasha Levine," she said. Vermont's calm was in her tone, but it was strained. "I heard what happened tonight." "That's quick news for someone 2 states away," I said. "I had a feeling," she admitted. "When you called, Archie, I knew it would end badly." Rizzo never believed in Concord. "But I'm calling because you need to know something." He reached out to me again, yesterday. He wanted me to sign a statement saying the recipe was flawed from the start, that the cracks were inevitable, that landed like a dropped brick. "And did you?" "Of course not." I told him the bread was sound. But, Archie, he offered me money. A lot of it, more than he could cover on his own, which means someone else was backing him. I felt the line tighten in my hand. "You're saying Garrison?" "I don't know. Maybe." But Rizzo wasn't acting alone. He never did, I thanked her, promised Wolfe would hear it, and hung up. Wolfe had opened his eyes, watching me like he'd been listening through the cord. I gave him the full report, word for word. "Phooey," he muttered. "Predictable." Garrison profits twice, first by undermining the loaf, then by buying back control at a discount. Rizzo is his instrument, but Miss Levin's testimony confirms the pattern. I frowned. So it wasn't just ambition. It was collusion, exactly, Wolfe said. And worse, cowardice. Mr. Garrison hid behind Rizzo's bluster, letting him foul his own nest. Now, with exposure, he will attempt to retreat into numbers. But Concord has been broken by both of them. Before I could answer, the bell rang again. This time it wasn't a client or a suspect. It was Saul Panzer, unannounced, steady as always. He entered with a nod, his coat damp from the drizzle. "Thought you'd want to know quick," he said. After the meeting, Garrison didn't go home. He went straight to a lawyer's office on Lexington. Spent an hour inside. When he left, he looked pale as chalk. He's preparing for fallout. Could be contracts, Could be shares. Wolfe's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but the acknowledgement of a piece sliding into place. Good. Thank you, Mr. Panzer. You have justified your retainer again. Saul inclined his head and slipped out without ceremony. Wolfe turned to me. Garrison's haste betrays him. He fears the collapse more than the exposure. That makes him dangerous. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow you will visit Miss Cardo. Impress upon her the necessity of swift action. If she hesitates, Garrison will strangle her with legalities. I nodded. And Rizzo? He's already undone, Wolfe said. But if Garrison remains in play, Concord is still imperiled. Remove him, and the loaf may yet stand. I finished my notes, but my head was buzzing with the new layer of rot. It wasn't just betrayal in the ovens or sabotage in transport. It was a conspiracy stretching into contracts and ledgers. And if Wolfe was right, tomorrow would decide whether the Concord loaf lived or died outside the bakery. Morning came grey and damp, but Fritz's breakfast tried its best to fight the weather. Wolfe stayed rooted in his chair while I headed downtown to meet Livia at the bakery. She looked worn, as though the revelation had aged her a decade overnight, but her jaw was set. Matteo hovered nearby, protective as ever. Garrison went to ground, I told them. He's making moves behind the curtain. If you don't act, he'll seize control with papers instead of sabotage. Livia's eyes narrowed. Then we'll act. Concord belongs to us, not him. Matteo clenched his fist. He thought he could buy us, scare us, or break us. Not anymore. I passed on Wolfe's warning about haste. You'll need allies. Sasha Levin's already given us a piece of proof. Rizzo offered her money to denounce the recipe. That ties him to Garrison Livia. Nodded, determination overtaking fatigue. Then we'll use it. We'll call a board meeting. Matteo and I will confront Garrison with it before he buries us in contracts. I left them ready for battle, and by the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was already deep in thought, lips pressed, eyes closed. When I relayed Livia's resolve, he murmured, "Excellent. Bread rises only if the baker commits. She has chosen." The case wasn't finished. The sabotage had been exposed, yes, but the struggle for Concord had shifted from ovens to offices, from flour to figures. Wolfe had lit the path, but it was Livia and Matteo who would have to walk it. That night, as I sat in the office writing up the notes, Wolfe broke the silence with one of his rare reflections. Concord, Archie, is a fragile fiction. It exists only while all agree to believe in it. One man's greed, one man's fear, these are enough to fracture it. But truth, once spoken, is a yeast. It leavens the air. It cannot be contained. Remember that I grinned, pen still scratching. That's the trouble with you, boss. You don't just solve cases. You write epigrams. Someday I'll collect them and sell them by the loaf. He closed his eyes again, dismissing me. But I saw the faintest flicker of satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. The Concord loaf was safe for now, but in Wolfe's mind, the greater lesson had already been baked, cooled, and served. And like all his truths, it would not break itself. By the next morning, the air in the brownstone was heavy, but not from orchids or Fritz's eggs. It was the kind of weight that comes when a case has been cut open, but hasn't finished bleeding. Wolfe was at his desk early, a stack of papers untouched beside him, his eyes half-lidded as though conserving energy for some private tribunal. I had just finished typing my notes when the phone rang again. It was Livia, her voice clipped and raw. "We called the board meeting," she said. "Matteo and I put the evidence on the table. Sasha's refusal, the sabotage, Rizzo's collusion. Garrison denied everything, of course. But Archie, he's moving faster than we thought. He filed an injunction last night to freeze our operations until an independent review proves the bread is sound. He wants us paralyzed. That was his insurance training talking. cripple confidence, control the narrative. I promised her we'd handle it and hung up. Wolfe had been listening with his eyes closed, but when I finished, he opened them fully. "Predictable," he said. "A man of numbers will always retreat into procedure. He seeks to win not with hands, but with paper." "Phooey," I asked him what we were supposed to do about it. Courts and injunctions weren't usually on our menu. "Miss Cardo must not merely defend," he said. "She must strike. We will give her the means." At 10, Saul Panzer arrived, punctual as a metronome, with fresh news. Rizzo and Garrison met again this morning, corner table at a midtown diner. No envelopes this time, just Rizzo ranting and Garrison listening. When they left, Rizzo looked finished, but Garrison, he looked smug. Wolfe absorbed it without comment. He motioned for Saul to sit, then called Fritz from the kitchen. When Fritz appeared, Wolfe gestured toward him. "You will prepare 2 Concord loaves today, one according to Miss Cardo's methods, one sabotaged as I will instruct. Mr. Goodwin will deliver them to the review board as evidence. Bread speaks louder than affidavits." I leaned forward. "You're going to demonstrate sabotage in real time?" "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Garrison will claim fault in the recipe. We will show that the recipe is sound, and only malice can injure it." By afternoon, Fritz had performed the miracle. The first loaf cooled intact, crust proud and glossy. The second, with Wolfe's directed stress, an almost imperceptible scoring of the cooling seam, collapsed along the middle just as the bakeries had. It was sabotage rendered visible, undeniable. I carried both loaves downtown to the temporary office of the review board, a makeshift tribunal of investors and consultants convened by Garrison's petition. They sat at a long table, papers stacked like fortresses, and when I set down the 2 loaves, their eyes lit up with curiosity that not even bureaucracy could stifle. I gave them Wolfe's message. Bread is honest. It breaks only where it is forced. This loaf, I indicated the intact one, is Concord as it is meant. This, I touched the wounded twin, is Concord as it has been treated. If you cannot see the difference, you deserve to eat crackers. They tested, examined, murmured. The demonstration cut through Garrison's legal fog like sunlight through smoke. When I left, the board was already buzzing in favor of Livia and Matteo. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe received my report with a grunt of satisfaction. He lifted his beer and said, "So ends the injunction. Garrison will retreat to his ledgers. Miss Cardo will have her bakery. Justice, though rarely neat, is served." That evening, Livia herself came by, Matteo at her side. She placed a fresh Concord loaf on Wolfe's desk, unbroken, whole. "For you," she said simply. "We wanted to thank you. Concord will go on, without Rizzo, without Garrison, just us." And the bread, Wolfe inclined his head. "Bread is continuity, Miss Cardo. Guard it well. Do not let it become symbol only. Symbols are fragile. Bread must be eaten." Matteo laughed softly, but Livia's eyes glistened. She nodded, and the 2 of them left, carrying with them both burden and freedom. When the door closed, I looked at Wolfe. "You know, boss, you didn't just save their loaf. You saved the whole idea. Concord, agreement, people needed that." He closed his eyes, lips pressed together. "Perhaps. But men will always fracture agreement. They cannot help it. Bread may heal, but men insist on breaking." Fritz entered then, carrying plates. Dinner was served, pheasant with sauce, vegetables arranged with the precision of geometry. He set it down and poured Wolfe's beer. Wolfe raised the glass slightly, almost in salute, before drinking. I sat across from him, notebook forgotten, and thought about the Concord loaf, how something so simple had pulled greed, pride, cowardice, and loyalty into the same room and forced them to show their hands. That's the thing about Wolfe's cases. They start with something ordinary, a loaf of bread or a scrap of paper, and by the end they reveal the fault lines under people's lives. As we ate, Wolfe broke the silence one last time. "Archie, remember this. A loaf is made of 4 things: flour, water, salt, yeast. But it is also made of time and trust. Remove either, and it collapses. So too with men," I grinned. "And here I thought I was just your legman. Turns out I'm also your philosopher's stenographer." He gave me one of those rare looks, half disdain, half tolerance, that passes for affection in Wolfe's vocabulary. Then he turned back to his dinner, the matter closed, the brownstone restored to its silence. Outside, the city still tore at itself with its appetites. Inside, harmony held, at least until the next knock on the door. And for now, that was enough. The brownstone had returned to its natural state, quiet, insulated, a fortress against the city's ceaseless racket. Fritz's plates had been cleared, the orchids upstairs resumed their dominance, and Wolfe sat at his desk, a half-inch of beer still in the glass beside him. For most men, silence is absence. For Wolfe, it is presence, a possession. I had finished typing the last notes and was considering whether to risk another wisecrack when he finally spoke. "Archie," he said, eyes half closed, "there is no mystery as durable as appetite. Men will betray nations, wives, friends, but bread, when broken deliberately, betrays all 3 at once." I leaned back, smiling. "You're saying Rizzo didn't just wound a loaf. He wounded the idea that fed it." "Precisely," Wolfe murmured. "Miss Cardo and Mr. D'Angelo will labor to restore that idea. Perhaps they will succeed, perhaps not. But the truth has been spoken, and truth, once leavened, cannot be unbaked." He reached for the last piece of Concord loaf Fritz had left, broke it with deliberate pressure, and studied the intact crumb. "Whole," he said simply, then ate it. That was Wolfe's verdict. Not a gavel, not a flourish, but the confirmation that harmony, however fragile, could still endure. I closed my notebook with a snap. "Case wrapped, loaf saved, culprits exposed. You've done it again, and all without leaving the chair. Someday I'll start keeping a tally. How many battles you've won without ever lifting more than a fork." His lips pressed, the faintest shadow of amusement flickering there. "You may, if you wish. But keep the tally honest, Archie. Bread is honest. Men must strive to be. And that was that." Wolfe leaned back, beer in hand, fortress restored. Outside, the city kept fracturing itself into hungers and bargains, but in that office, for that evening, concord held. Dinner was served, the silence deepened, and the brownstone closed its doors on a world determined, always, to break itself. It was Nero Wolfe's world again, intact and whole.